Liam had never been a runner. In fact, for most of his adult life, he avoided physical activity altogether. But after facing a series of personal struggles, losing his job, battling depression, and drifting from his friends, he decided he needed a goal. Something just for him. One morning, he opened his laptop and registered for a local marathon set to happen 6 months later. Training was brutal. Liam was overweight, inexperienced, and constantly out of breath. Yet he persisted. He ran in the early morning before sunrise, and late at night when the streets were quiet. He read books on endurance, adjusted his diet, and recorded his progress with dedication. There were no cameras, no followers, and no applause, only a man fighting himself. When marathon day arrived, Liam stood among hundreds of seasoned runners. Within the first few kilometers, he was left behind. His pace was slow, his legs ached, but he never stopped. Hours passed. Most runners had finished. Spectators had gone home. The banners were being taken down. But Liam kept moving. Eventually, he crossed the finish line, long after the race had ended officially. No one was there to hand him a medal. There were no pictures, no cheering crowd. But to Liam, it didn't matter. He hadn't run for attention. He had run to prove to himself that he could finish something hard. And he did. That marathon, unseen by the world, changed his life. It taught him that the greatest victories happen not in the spotlight, but in silence, where persistence outlasts doubt. Ava was a writer who hadn't written in years. Once filled with ideas and dreams of publishing a novel, she had slowly drifted away from her passion. Life had become too busy, bills, deadlines, expectations. Her creative spark faded into a routine of responsibilities. One evening, while cleaning her apartment, Ava discovered an old, empty notebook at the bottom of a drawer. Its pages were untouched, waiting. She paused, ran her fingers over the cover, and for the first time in years, she sat at her desk. The first words were difficult. They felt awkward, disconnected. But Ava kept writing, page after page, night after night. She didn't show anyone. The notebook wasn't for fame or success, it was for her. A safe place where her thoughts could breathe again. Over time, her confidence returned. The empty pages began to fill with characters, emotions, and reflections she had forgotten she held inside. The act of writing became a ritual, a form of healing and rediscovery. Months later, the notebook was full. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was a journey, proof that creativity never truly disappears. It just waits for us to return, patiently, like an old friend. Ava's story reminds us that starting again doesn't require a perfect moment. Sometimes, all it takes is an empty page, and the courage to begin. In a quiet village nestled between hills, there lived an elderly clockmaker named Elias. His workshop was filled with ancient gears, dusty pendulums, and intricate pieces that few people knew how to handle anymore. Time, ironically, seemed to slow down within those walls. Elias wasn't famous, nor was he wealthy. But people from nearby towns brought him their broken clocks and watches, knowing that if anyone could bring them back to life, it was him. He never rushed, never promised quick fixes. Instead, he would study each mechanism patiently, observing its rhythm and listening to its silence. To outsiders, it seemed tedious and outdated. Why fix something old when you could buy something new? But Elias believed every timepiece had a soul, memories it had counted, moments it had held. Fixing a clock was, to him, a way of honoring time itself. One day, a young man brought in a completely shattered grandfather clock. It was his late grandfather's, and though others had said it was beyond repair, Elias accepted the challenge. For weeks, he worked meticulously, crafting missing parts by hand, aligning gears with precision, restoring what faded by age. When he finally wound it up and heard the first chime ring out, it was more than just a sound, it was a resurrection. The young man was speechless, eyes misted with emotion. Elias asked for no praise, only offering a gentle smile. His joy was in the process, not the applause. The villagers often spoke of Elias's work not just as craftsmanship, but as a lesson in patience, respect, and the beauty of restoring what others give up on. His story became a metaphor. Sometimes, the most broken things, whether clocks or people, just need time, care, and someone who refuses to give up on them. Every morning, Nora sat by the same window in her small apartment. It overlooked a gray alley with cracked pavement and flickering streetlights. Most people ignored the view, calling it dull, but Nora saw something different. To her, it was a canvas. Years ago, she had dreamed of being an artist. But after her parents passed and life responsibilities piled up, she set her brushes aside. Still, each morning she sat by that window with a cup of tea, watching the light change the alley's colors. She noticed how raindrops drew patterns on the glass, how shadows danced when the wind blew. One day, feeling restless, she pulled out her old sketch pad. Just a few lines, nothing serious. But then a few lines became a scene. A scene became a painting. Each day after, she painted what she saw out the window, not just the alley, but the life within it. A stray cat sleeping on a pipe. Children chasing each other after school. A man practicing violin on his balcony. With time, her apartment filled with paintings. A friend who visited insisted she share them online. Reluctantly, she agreed. To her surprise, people were drawn to her work, not because of grandeur, but because of its simplicity, honesty, and quiet beauty. What others saw as an ugly alley, she had turned into stories of color and hope. Nora's window never changed, but how she saw it, and how she chose to express it, changed her life. Her story reminds us that inspiration is everywhere, even in the most ordinary places, if we only choose to see it. In a crowded city where noise often drowned out beauty, Leo worked long hours cleaning train stations. Most people passed him without a glance, just another face in a uniform. What they didn't know was that Leo had once been a gifted violinist. Years ago, he played for orchestras, concerts, and private events. But when his family fell into financial hardship, he sold his violin and left music behind to survive. Though he kept busy with work, a hollow space remained within him, something silent, waiting. One winter night, while sweeping under a bench, Leo discovered a dusty violin case. Abandoned. Forgotten. Inside was an old, scratched violin with broken strings. But to Leo, it felt like a heartbeat from the past. He took it home, cleaned it, replaced the strings, and began to play again, quietly, late at night, with windows closed. His fingers were stiff, his bow shaky, but the music slowly returned. And with it, a part of himself he thought he had lost. After weeks of practice, he began playing at sunrise in a hidden corner of the station, where commuters walked by. At first, no one noticed. But little by little, people began to pause. Some smiled. Some cried. Children danced. Someone recorded a video. Soon, strangers returned not for the train, but for the music. Leo never asked for money, applause, or recognition. The joy of playing again was enough. His music filled the station with warmth in a way cleaning supplies never could. One instrument, left behind by someone else, had reignited a life. Leo's story became a quiet reminder that no gift is truly lost, it only waits for the right moment, and the courage to play again. Mira was a teacher in a rural village where opportunities were scarce and resources limited. Her classroom had peeling walls, broken chalkboards, and no internet. Yet every morning, she stood in front of her students with unwavering energy. She believed that education was more than textbooks. It was planting seeds, ideas, dreams, possibilities. While others focused on survival, Mira focused on hope. She brought newspapers from the city so her students could learn about the world. She painted maps on the walls by hand. She wrote science experiments using kitchen items. Some villagers laughed at her optimism, calling it unrealistic. But Mira kept teaching, year after year. She taught children how to think, question, imagine. When one student won a scholarship to study abroad, she didn't celebrate. She simply smiled and continued teaching the next class, just as passionately. Over time, her students became engineers, nurses, teachers, and even one mayor. They returned, one by one, to thank the woman who had given them more than lessons. She had given them the belief that they mattered. Mira never sought recognition. To her, success was watching a child realize they could change their future. Her classroom remained modest, but her impact echoed far beyond its walls. Like seeds carried by the wind, her influence spread silently, growing in unexpected places. Her story teaches us that sometimes, the greatest revolutions begin not with loud declarations, but with quiet dedication, and the courage to believe in others when no one else does. Aiden had always been fascinated by mountains. Their towering silence, their steady strength, they felt like reminders of something greater than himself. As a child, he promised that one day he would climb the highest peak in his country. But life, as it often does, took him in another direction. Years passed. Aiden became a mechanic, working long hours in a city garage. He fixed broken engines, worn tires, rusted machines, always with care, but never with passion. Still, the mountains stayed with him in photos on his wall, in dreams that visited him quietly at night. One day, after recovering from an illness that nearly took his life, he remembered the promise he had made to his younger self. He was older now, slower, and no longer as strong. But the thought of the mountain, still waiting, stirred something in him. He began training. Early morning jogs. Weekend hikes. Studying routes and weather. Neighbors laughed, saying he was too old. Friends doubted he would finish. But Aiden wasn't chasing glory, he was keeping a promise. Months later, he stood at the foot of the peak, boots laced, breath calm. The climb was grueling. Winds whipped his face, rocks scraped his hands, and snow blurred his vision. But he kept going, step after step, breath after breath. When he reached the summit, he didn't cheer. He simply stood in silence, heart full, eyes scanning the sky. It wasn't about conquering the mountain. It was about proving to himself that it was never too late to finish what you start. Aiden descended quietly. Back home, he placed a small stone from the summit next to the photo of his childhood self. It was more than a souvenir, it was a symbol of endurance, of memory, and of the quiet power of a kept promise. In the heart of an old town stood a library that most had forgotten. Dust clung to shelves, and cobwebs hung like curtains. But every evening, just before sunset, a small lantern would glow in the reading room. It was lit by Ms. Renna, the town's oldest librarian. She had worked there for decades, long after funding disappeared and visitors stopped coming. Her salary had ended years ago, but she came anyway, cleaning, organizing, restoring books as if they were sacred relics. To outsiders, her efforts seemed pointless. Who reads physical books anymore? Who visits libraries when phones hold the world? But to Ms. Renna, the library was more than a building, it was a sanctuary of knowledge, of stories waiting to be rediscovered. Slowly, her consistency caught attention. A curious child wandered in one day, then returned with friends. A college student came to study in silence. A single mother sought a quiet place to read to her son. The lantern's soft light became a symbol of peace in a noisy world. Ms. Renna taught children how to care for books, how to find answers, how to ask better questions. She didn't lecture. She simply created space, for curiosity, for imagination, for growth. Years later, when she passed away, the entire town attended her memorial. People shared how one quiet librarian had changed their lives, not with grand gestures, but with steady presence and light. The town restored the library in her honor, naming the reading room after her. And every evening, a lantern was lit, not out of tradition, but as a reminder, that quiet dedication can ignite the minds of generations.